So our topic today is fitting in versus belonging. Those opening words are worth repeating. Our longing for community and purpose is so powerful that it can sometimes drive us to join groups, relationships, or systems of belief that to our diminished or divided self give the false impression of belonging. Toko Turner. Well, we posted that quotation on our social media pages last week. We try to post some thoughts during the week to get you thinking about the theme of the month or one of the topics we'll be talking about in a Sunday program. And someone responded to this quote. How do you tell the difference? Exactly. I told the person, come on Sunday. I hope they did. It is sometimes very difficult to do so. Because belonging is such a powerful human need, I might even say it's a human drive, we seek ways to belong. We are not whole without our connections to other people. We are social animals by our nature. And we are also smart, and so are others. And some people have figured out how to use that drive to belong to achieve their desire for power and advantage. Well, one of my inspirations for this talk today is a conversation I had many years ago with a member in a different ethical society. She and her siblings had been raised in ethical culture. One of her siblings had, as an adult, been drawn to a group that seemed to meet their needs for belonging and purpose. They found friends there, people to be close to, and slowly began cutting off all their ties to family and friends if they weren't in the group, and trying to recruit their family and friends to join the group. Eventually, all of their friends were people only within the group, and they didn't talk to anybody who wasn't in the group. They even worked for an employer who was part of the group and who demanded that anyone working for them attend workshops that promoted the group. They donated a lot of their money to the group. Their family felt like they were lost. As this person talking to me about her family said, it was almost worse than if they had died because they couldn't even really mourn for them. They were still there, but in this person's opinion, caught in a trap that no one in the family could figure out how to free them from. Now that group, which is very large and international, has often been called a cult. I'm not going to name it today because the point isn't that particular cult. The point is the dynamic that happens. And something that this person said then. We need to help our children make better decisions so they don't get caught up in a cult. Well, I'm using the term cult quite deliberately here. The word has a number of different meanings, but the one that I'm using is to describe an insular group that has very strong boundaries on who belongs and who doesn't, that usually has a charismatic and controlling leader, and that limits the beliefs and practices of the members. As parents, we often think that the best we can do is instill good values in our children, maintain good connection with them, and then they will make good decisions in their lives. They'll be free. They won't join some weird cult. And sometimes that's not enough, and parents get a big surprise. People who are able to simulate those values and simulate good connection are able to play on the natural desire for belonging and purpose and use that in ways that control rather than liberate. Now, mind control and seeing the light or enlightenment are sometimes hard to separate when you believe that you are thinking and choosing freely. The very important human need to learn, to expand our ideas, to grow, can be twisted into believing that we have found the only truth, truth with a capital T. I'm reminded here of a t-shirt I saw on someone many years ago. The front of it said, "May I be in the company of those who search for the truth." And the back of it said, "And deliver me from those who have found it." It really is very easy to label groups with which we disagree as mind control and cultish. We can see that attempt being made right now. Some people are teaching that American history isn't all positive, that bad things that happened in our history were part of the mainstream and not just minor exceptions. And that idea has been called cultish. Woke, a word which began to mean awakened from complacency, is mocked as a false enlightenment. The tip-off here is which group is banning access to information that disagrees with them. Not just making choices of what to teach and what not to teach, but actually banning access to that which teaches something else. This argument and the banning of opposing views is by people who are also happy to have the support of those who believe that a person deeply embedded within our government went on social media a few years ago to post prophecies and inside information, including that a non-existent basement of a carry-out restaurant was the center of a huge nexus of child sex trafficking. Some of this conspiracy idea began in 2017, early on with a message saying that the presidential candidate who had just lost the then most recent election would be arrested in 2 days. Well, that candidate has still not been arrested years later, but the story keeps changing, including one version is that the candidate actually was arrested in 2017, and what we're seeing is a body double. And there are some stories saying that that person has already been executed, and that all news stories about that candidate are false. One celebrity who countered this narrative ended up having to block more than 1 million social media accounts that attacked her position. So it's not a small problem. So how do we protect ourselves and especially our growing children, and indeed our fellow citizens we care about, from falling for such stories? It turns out those who have researched how people get caught up in cult-like groups, that arguing against the obviously false beliefs of people in such groups rarely helps people choose to leave, rarely helps to argue the truth of what they're believing. And why? Partly because nobody likes to be wrong. And people telling us that we're wrong or seeming to say we're stupid sounds like an attack. And our defenses and offenses go up very quickly. But mostly it's because belonging to a group with such teachings, even when that group then starts getting us to do things like cutting ties with loving family, giving all of our money to the group, even getting us to commit violence or illegal acts, all of that gives people a sense of belonging. And I'm also going to acknowledge that how much a group feels like a cult or controlling group or real belonging may differ depending on who you are. If you're a straight cis male with Christian beliefs, you may both fit in and belong in a church that has patriarchal and homophobic teachings. But if you're a lesbian teen daughter of one of those people, you will likely experience that group more like a cult, as it tries to deny an important part of who you are and tell you that you are not who you are. But back to how we metaphorically inoculate against joining cults or other groups which similarly control those who are parts of a group. Teaching critical thinking before somebody encounters a cult-like group is essential. Arguing afterwards doesn't help, but teaching critical thinking first does help. But also teaching the dynamics of what authentic belonging is about versus fake belonging is crucial. So there's a chance that the person will recognize what's going on. Also, one of the ways we do this is modeling. And part of that is limiting how much we ourselves demonize or belittle those with whom we disagree. We can recognize some concrete, terrible consequences of policies and practices we disagree with, without dehumanizing the people who propose those policies and practices. And it also begins with teaching teens who really want to fit in that really isn't about belonging. You know, teenager years are the age range when we as human beings naturally begin to form our own ties outside our primary family. Some of our primate cousins leave the primary family to join another group at that time of development. Our human teens are starting to explore what it means to belong to something beyond the family. And sometimes they make the mistake of thinking that if they just adjust themselves a little bit, they'll fit in with the cool kids or with the nerds or whatever group they think is the one they want to belong to and with. Every group has norms. It is how groups exist. But some norms demand that you change who you are in order to fit in. Our gathering exercise was an opportunity to share how universal the experience is of trying to fit in and realizing that we are sacrificing a part of ourself to do that. And cult-like groups know how to manipulate this difference. If you can be convinced that there's a master plan in the government to steal millions of children and commit pedophilia, then you are being empowered to be a better person. If you're convinced to be part of the army that saves those children from the fiends who want to steal them. That's where all the pieces fit together. Critical thinking is one. And by critical thinking, I mean, is such a plot reasonable considering how the world works? Would it really be possible to organize such a secret plan where millions would have to be perfectly complicit and millions of children had disappeared with almost no leaks? Is it really reasonable to think that someone who appears periodically in the media is actually in prison or has been executed already? Do all of our public leaders really have body doubles? Does the story change often? And those promoting the story never actually seem to be held accountable when the accounts they predicted don't happen. Does it make sense? Is the first part of critical thinking. Are there reasonable links between the evidence and the conclusions? Is there even evidence? And by evidence, I mean concrete experiences that are available to all, presented in ways that are easily open to checking. For example, I'm always suspicious if the only evidence someone can give me is on a YouTube video. Not having the written word makes it difficult to hold someone accountable to their statements. And video is easy to manipulate through selective editing. And another aspect of critical thinking to develop before you're challenged is to always try to consider alternative explanations when you hear something that sounds fantastic, and actively try to find evidence for those alternatives as well. Yet another part of critical thinking is to think about this. What benefit is there to me of believing this? And what benefit is there to the person telling me to get me to believe it? And in general, why is this person wanting me to believe this? What is their expertise and who has confirmed that expertise? Note here, predictions that are dramatic but never actually happened are not proof of expertise. In other words, be an active learner. But also, if it's your teen or yourself, make sure that there are lots of opportunities to connect and belong in constructive ways. Encourage participation in activities and organizations that help that team develop their own interests. Help them participate in some groups in which the benefit is not wholly to the participants. Also help teens especially connect to activities and organizations that connect them with a sense of purpose, something larger than their own interests. And don't encourage them to hide some part of themselves in order to belong. Now, I'll tell you a story. When my brother was very young, and I mean before kindergarten, he had a very bad habit of hitting every other kid as his way of saying hello. And I mean really hitting them. He was strong. Trying to get him to stop did not work. And I know it was very painful to my mother that he behaved this way. What finally worked was when he started school with other kids. Mom sat him down and explained to him that he had a choice, and that if he wanted other kids to like him for himself, he would need to let them get to know him. And if he hit them first, they would likely not want to get to know him. And it worked. It wasn't just about fitting in for him. It was about letting him develop himself more and have real friendships, getting more of what he actually wanted. So cult-like groups get people committed to them primarily in 4 ways. And I speak here not only from having read literature and talked to some people who have come out of cults in general, but for about a 2-year period of my career, I got known in a certain circle of women as being a safe person to come to counseling for as they were leaving one of the larger religious cults in America. And so I got a chance to really listen to their stories while they were on the edge of leaving. So these are the 4 ways that people get you committed. First, they create a sense that only here are you ever going to really fit in. Only we in this group will really love you. And they gradually separate you from any other alternative connections where you might also belong. Second, they create a sense of purpose. And this often taps into unfulfilled purpose that would have been found in other ways, but the person had not yet found those. 3, they control your attitudes and your actions. This often includes sexual manipulation. And 4, get the person to do something that truly separates them from returning to the wider circle. Maybe it's just dress differently. It may not be the first step of getting someone to join, but it is almost always a step. I think of here one of the women I counseled who, one of the things she was forbidden to do as part of this group was ever use what she called a ready mix. She was never allowed to cook anything except from scratch, because that identified you with the wider world. So if you only cook from scratch, in our world, you're pretty weird. Gangs sometimes do this by getting initiates to hurt or kill someone. Sexual manipulation can also serve this goal as well. Now, here at this society, we read each week an identity statement. We read it aloud to remind ourselves what the society stands for. But it's not indoctrination because nobody has to read it and nobody has to agree with it. If you're new, it's an invitation to consider whether this statement fits your vision of what brings out your best and authentic self and who you want to connect with. Now, reading together a statement as we did before the pandemic, to some people felt like mind control. And some people are especially sensitive to that because of other life experiences. But if it were a cult, how would it be different? At the beginning, it might not be. Cult-like groups also seem to give permission to disagree. But all groups have values and beliefs, however openly or subtly, that help set some boundaries of what the group is. Here, we center the idea that if we act as though every person has worth, we will create a more humane world. We also center the idea that relationships matter deeply, and we are through life formed by the quality of our relationships. We don't teach that anyone who disagrees with us is subhuman or somehow not worthy of being treated as fully human. For one thing, that would be a contradiction to that first of those values. We do accept that some people aren't going to find an ethical society the right place for them, and that doesn't make them a bad person. And we accept that there will be lots of disagreement within the society. That's why most weeks we ask that people here respond to a talk, or that your gathering question answers are from your own perspective, and that we encourage you to listen to the other person's perspective, even if it's different. While political feelings have been particularly high in the past few years, we do our best not to demonize those who disagree with us. It's easy and common for cult groups to identify their leaders somehow as religious saviors and the supposed enemies of the group as sometimes literally Satan. We certainly don't do that with our unity statement. You know, it is sometimes a temptation to divide the world like that. The dividing of the world into us and them is one way of expressing belonging. Of course, groups have boundaries of who belongs and who doesn't. The question is, how are those boundaries set? Can they be challenged? And whether they are what a biologist calls semi-permeable boundaries, not completely cutting us off from those who are not inside the boundary. And in fact, drawing different circles in our lives. Like, we may be part of this group here, but we may be part of the human family as a wider circle of belonging, and the circle of life as an even wider circle, all of which we acknowledge have a call on us. A group becomes a false belonging, I think, when it shifts from who belongs to the group to who belongs to the circle of being worthy of respect and fair treatment. Us and them are sometimes legitimate differences, if they are not the only differences one sees. Those who prefer chocolate ice cream and those who prefer strawberry and those who prefer to have a different flavor every week, those are differences that don't define our humanity, though they may describe who we share a carton of ice cream with. Cutting off, belittling, demonizing, even going to war with those who differ, that is not us and them differences, but us versus them, making an enemy of those who disagree. Well, I am mindful, as I am learning Swedish, that in that language, the word for enemy is fiend, F-I-E-N-D. And fiend is the name in many European languages for Satan, whose name quite literally means enemy. I have spoken before on the danger of making those with whom we disagree into enemies. It is a lot easier to dehumanize someone if we think they're an enemy, even to go on the offense and bomb their cities, to sacrifice civilians in the name of winning over an enemy that we want to defeat. And if we fight a defensive war, if we have this kind of enemy thinking, we try at the end of the war to leave those we identify as the enemy without resources and without power. On a much more close and intimate level, we here in this society, like other groups that try to practice healthy belonging, do not ask that you cut yourself off from family and friends. While we welcome that some want to share what they found here with others, we don't have any demands that you bring your friends and family in order to really belong. Ethical culture doesn't ask that you give all your money to us, though we do ask you to recognize that groups like ours don't exist without some financial support. There's a huge difference between asking that you donate exclusively and in huge amounts to a group you belong to, and asking that you are realistic and understand that groups don't just fall from heaven, fully staffed and with buildings, that such support for a group is a cooperative effort. Perhaps here in the ethical society, we sometimes go to the opposite extreme too much, either not asking, or some people buy into the transactional approach that looks at an ethical society as a service and we pay for a service, rather than encouraging a general sense of support. We all want to belong. We all want to contribute something of ourselves to that which is greater than our individual self. Unfortunately, those natural human needs can be manipulated, especially during those years in which kids are beginning to form alliances outside their family, by those who twist those needs to meet their own desires for power and control over others. And in turn, that possibility of being manipulated may prevent some people, out of fear of being manipulated, from ever finding out where they can really belong, where they are not asked just to fit in, to file off their square edges to fit into a round hole. In real belonging, we'll find not just a sense of purpose and people who accept us, but find ourselves and the group expanding and learning. Will ourselves welcome others into the circle, including those often considered outsiders in more restrictive meanings of belonging? Instead of being threatened by those outside the circle, or identifying those outside the circle as lesser, we'll also be encouraged to belong to more than one circle. Belonging to a smaller circle prepares us for a sense of belonging to larger circles, including those circles of all of humanity and all of life. So those were some of my thoughts on how we can look at our own, and especially our children and our teenagers' lives when we think about how that sense of belonging sometimes gets manipulated. We'll say goodbye now to our video watchers. Please join us sometime for a live Sunday morning and the full experience.